You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. I'm Jill Waterman, the show's creative producer. I'm also host of our new monthly series, Picturing World Cultures. As an avid traveler, I've made pictures in many different cultures, but I sometimes get the feeling I'm on the outside looking in. While a camera is often considered a passport for seeing the world, I've found that too much time spent looking through a lens can narrow my field of view, blinding me to aspects of culture that are often elusive or unspoken. This kind of photography calls for more than just a good eye for composition and detail, and it doesn't work with a one-size-fits-all approach. I've created this series for people like me who aspire to venture off the grid and are curious to learn from the perspectives of local experts. Each month, I'll talk with a different photographer who's deeply invested in the people and cultures they photograph, to learn about their insights, discuss their working methods, and especially to hear their stories. A common thread among my guests is dedication to time spent in the field, immersed in their work. And while cameras and gear are part of their toolkit, the intangible elements of curiosity, empathy, and the passion to dig deep are even more important. I hope you'll join me on these monthly adventures. Our first stop, Australia, with Wayne Quilliam, an indigenous imagemaker, storyteller, and cultural advisor based in Melbourne. For more than 30 years, Wayne has explored the subtleties of Aboriginal identity, focusing on the lives and experiences of First Nations peoples in contemporary Australian culture. From his itinerant start making pictures for an Aboriginal newspaper, Wayne has built a reputation for trust and friendship in communities large and small, which now spans multiple generations. Wayne Quilliam, welcome to the show.
An absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me.
So you've specialized in photographing Australia's Indigenous communities for more than 30 years. And from what I understand, Australia has hundreds of different First Nations communities, but they're generally categorized under two distinct cultures, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. What distinguishes these two groups?
Yes, the mainland Australia, including my own small island state of Tasmania, we are known as Aboriginal people. We are the first peoples of the land. We've been here since time began. And we have so many different variations of different tribes. People can use it as a collective. Before non-Indigenous people come to this country, it was reasonably assumed that it was in excess of 700 to 800 different tribes throughout Australia, speaking a variety of different dialects, from the Central Desert mob right through to Western Australia and down here in Victoria. The Torres Strait Islander people to the north of Australia, which is a collective group of islands which are associated with our own people, but are more collectively known throughout the South Pacific from Papua New Guinea to the Solomon Islands. So they have a more islander influence than our own people here on the mainland.
Interesting. Wow. I mean, Australia is a continent, but it's such a separate continent. I've always thought of it a bit like an island. But you are from the island of Tasmania, and you moved to Australia as an adult. Do you find there to be cultural differences between the continent of Australia and its island state?
Most definitely. Unfortunately, when the British invaded, they decimated my people. It was quite savage with a lot of Indigenous cultures throughout the world, the way that they treated our ancestors. And the majority of our culture was lost because it was forced out of them. And we lost a lot of our language, a lot of our stories, because our storytelling was never based on the written word. It was based on, communication through voice, song, dance, art.
Mm.
So growing up as a young man, I was told I was Aboriginal by my great-grandmother. We were told a variety of things, but because she was what was called stolen generation, she knew very little and she could speak very little about who we were because it was basically beaten out of her. So when I come to the mainland as a young man, I wanted to know more about Aboriginal culture, and we collectively know ourselves as the mob. And when I come over to the mainland, in particular, I started in Victoria, they absorbed me into the clans, their tribal groups, and introduced me to different people, which is where my journey began to learn as my cultural heritage, my cultural values from the mob on the mainland. And I continue to learn. You know, even now, nearly 60, I still learn so much about our people and the different ways that we think and the way our spirituality, our connection continually evolves and grows.
So, would you say that Aboriginal culture today is stronger within Australia than it is in Tasmania?
I wouldn't necessarily say it is stronger because Tasmania, there's a bit of a renaissance. A lot of our young people are now standing strong and resurrecting a lot of the things that were lost. And there's been a lot of discussion on how our own people are really not only learning from our mob here on the mainland, but also from other Indigenous cultures around the world. And quite constantly, we have people from everywhere from America to the South Pacific to New Zealand to a lot of different Indigenous cultures that are coming to our country, to Tasmania, to discuss culture and how to revive it. So it's becoming quite powerful now.
That's great. So, you joined the Navy at a very young age and you traveled widely before you got into photography. Did your introduction to different cultures through these travels influence your approach to making pictures once you picked up a camera?
Very much so. I was 15 when I joined the Royal Australian Navy, and when we were sailing in around Southeast Asia, back in the days of duty free and when the British still had control of Hong Kong is where I bought my first camera
Mm.
because culture interested me as we were visiting, say, different islands from Japan down into Guam and many of the different nations. And I found that using the camera was a fantastic communicator of how to understand and how to approach people. And I didn't realise at the time that that was going to be my calling, that introducing me to other cultures of the world was that little black box with a bit of glass on the front of it. And it still astounds me now, the places that it allows me into and the friendships that I've formed by using photography as, well, it used to be a tool, but now I call it a companion.
That's great. I like that. So, are there any early photos you took that influenced your approach to photography once you got back to Australia?
Yeah. And one of my first shoots was so interesting and it really brought reality to the world. So we were in Hong Kong Harbour. We were on what was called the Paying Off Tour. It was Australia's last aircraft carrier. The British Special Air Services were patrolling the border between mainland Hong Kong and China. And we went on patrol up there and I took my camera with me. And as we were patrolling along the fence, I was photographing, the British soldiers and the fence, and you could see the other side of the fence, the Chinese bunkers. And I said, what's all this ripped material up on the fence? And they said, oh, that's where, the Chinese people were trying to leave mainland China to get into Hong Kong. And basically, the Chinese guards gunned them down. Yeah, that was quite a brutal introduction into the world views and how I captured culture in a way. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
both the negative and the positive.
Yeah. Wow. So once you got back to Australia and started your own photography business, were there any early situations or early events you covered that were particularly memorable in setting you on the path to Indigenous culture?
It's when I did come back to Australia and I left the Navy that I really wanted to discover my Aboriginal identity. I needed to know more. It was like, who am I? Where am I from? What does it mean to me? And I picked up a camera and I put my dog my camera and all my gear in the back of an old van, and I decided to go on a bit of a journey to travel around Australia. And I was working for the Aboriginal newspaper called the Koori Mail. And Koori's like a tribal name. It's a collective name for a lot of different Aboriginal people in Southeast Australia. And as I travelled and lived in different communities from rural, remote and urban, and documenting it, this wasn't a paid gig. This was, $20 or $30. So back in those days, it was enough to get me by. But what it allowed me to do is build my own cultural identity and also discover all these stories that was happening in different communities, from the the remote desert communities through to the Torres Strait. And that basically set me on the path where I am now, and the friendships that have been formed and continue to grow and form. And the beautiful thing about it now is we look back, and now the kids come up to me and go, "Hey, Uncle," they said, "Yeah, you photographed my grandfather. We've got the photos, and now I'm photographing them and their kids." So it's a beautiful circle of life.
Yeah, that goes deep. So during that first trip, did you do any advanced research or connecting work before you would show up in a new community? Or was it just that simple as showing up and introducing yourself?
Yeah, back then there was no internet, no mobile phones.
Right.
I literally drove to a place, I'd make contact with the local Aboriginal Land Council or the Aboriginal Medical Service and go in and just have a yarn to them, introduce myself and who I was and where I was from. And without question, every time I introduced myself, the community was so welcoming and invited me into their homes, invited me into their communities, shared their stories. And what happened, it was like the grapevine, the next community would hear that I was coming, or I'd be able to introduce myself saying, "So-and-so sent me here. Are you happy that I come in and document?" And sometimes I'd stay there a week, sometimes a month, sometimes 3 months. It was all cold calling, as they'd say.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned these councils. It sounds like the communities were quite structured with representatives that would be responsible for the community at large. Is that a common thing?
In a lot of places, yes, there was designated indigenous councils that looked after everything from health and education and land, and they've become quite strong now throughout the country. They represent a lot of our people. But back then, some were structured, some were unstructured. A lot of the time, so if you go to a very remote community, there wouldn't be any councils. It would just be the tribal groups that would look after each other. It'd be the language groups. Back then, it was very diverse in who was looking after our people.
So you mentioned different languages. How many different languages are there, and how often do you run into language barriers in your work?
I never run into barriers because the majority of our people speak English. A lot of our remote communities speak both English and their own dialect. And because of my years of experience of working on community, if I can't necessarily speak it, I have a pretty good understanding of the language or the nuances of the different language groups to be able to get me by. It's mainly the old people. The young ones, with all their devices, all speak English, but some of our old people, like particularly I met these 3 old ladies a few years ago that I interviewed and photographed them when they first met white man.
Wow.
I mean, that in itself was just incredible to sit there thinking, as these young girls were in Australia and had never seen a white man before, and they basically took me on their journey of how it happened. It was absolutely fascinating.
Interesting. Well, that brings up a curious point. You're indigenous yourself, but you're very light skinned. So, how does your indigenous line trace? Was there a lot of intermarriage?
It's quite an interesting construct within Australia about the difference of skin colour and culture. Unlike some of the terminology is black, and people see colour, whereas we don't. We see culture. So As much as you believe in some of the science, is that indigenous Australians have what's called a regressive black gene. I'm not a scientist, I don't profess to be an expert, but when two, say, African people marry, there generally is a black baby. When a black person or a white person intermingle, generally still the child is quite dark, and over time its skin colour slowly lightens. In Australia, it's completely different. A lot of my friends, skin colour is completely black, marry a black woman or a black man, their child a lot of the time comes out very, very white.
Interesting.
So it's interesting, but see, we don't designate our culture by skin colour or look.
Mm-hmm. Would there tend to be a range of skin color within a family?
Oh, most definitely. A lot of my friends, we have very dark-skinned kids that are the young ones, and very light-skinned are the older ones, and vice versa. But as the old grandmothers say, culture is just like coffee. Doesn't matter how much milk you put in the coffee, it's still coffee. I love that old adage because it's like within my family. I have two siblings. My younger brother, he is very entrenched in culture. He is the holder of knowledge still back at home. So I treat him as an older brother because he has far more cultural knowledge of our home than I do, whereas I have more knowledge on the mainland. Whereas my sister has very little interest in culture. It's quite a peculiar way of doing it, and that's why I think we're so strong in who we are, because we either absorb and amplify who we are, or we choose not to. It's an individual choice.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So, one thing I was struck with when I was reviewing your website was a passage you wrote describing how watching, listening to, and conversing with First Nations people allows your photos to take on a life of their own. So, when you first arrive in a new community, how do you structure your time between that observing and speaking with people and making pictures? Is there much of a warming up period before you pick up your camera?
Yeah, it's very fluid. It's very fluid, whether it's our own people here in Australia or whether working with other Indigenous groups around the world. I'll give you a couple of recent examples. I was recently working with a mob up in Alaska, and they had a meeting of all the tribes in Anchorage. And there was an old auntie sitting out there talking with some young ones, and I just wandered over because she had her traditional regalia on, and I just said to her, I said, "Oh, listen, auntie, that's just beautiful. I'd love to take a photo. Would you mind?" And next thing you know, we're sitting there having a bit of a yarn about who I was and who she was, and then she invited me to their cultural centre. So it was an immediate type of connection with a totally different Indigenous group, and now we continue to talk online and send photos and talk to the young ones. Whereas here in Australia, I may go into a community and just say, for instance, one of the senior elders passed away. In the old days, we were never allowed to take photos. We were always basically told to put our cameras down as a mark of respect.
Right.
And it could come at a later stage we're allowed to take photos. Could be a week, could be 2 weeks. But these days now is that the old people will say to me, "Listen, Wayne, it's such an important time, and all the family are here now. Would you mind photographing and documenting the community?" And it's quite immediate. So yeah, it's different Indigenous groups around the world, different scenarios, but it's based purely on respect.
And it sounds like the channels for photography and mediated culture has opened up a lot in the minds of many people.
Oh, it has. Yeah, across the globe, it has definitely changed with the advent of more accessibility and information being passed. And people sometimes see our culture as set in stone in the past, but the reality is it's such a progressive culture that, I go out and teach some of our elders, the use of technology now, and they're now using that as a tool to teach their grandkids. It's beautiful.
That's great. So, when you're photographing someone like that auntie you mentioned, do you show pictures to the subjects you're photographing to increase their comfort level?
Always. Yeah. Yes, that's the beauty of it, is that and I do it with everybody. I give them that sense. It's a sense of connection.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sense of, I'm in your space. You're offering me this beautiful insight into who you are. And I like to reciprocate by showing them what the images are looking like to ensure that they're happy with how they're being portrayed, because it shouldn't be a one-way street. It needs to be a two-way street. And I try and teach some of the up-and-coming photographers of, the old ways was taught that, you photographed and you remained separated from your subject, that you were to offer an unbiased view, whereas I'm the totally opposite. I believe that immersing yourself in the story, not influencing it, but immersing yourself into it, gives you a better understanding of what that image or what that story will become.
Interesting. So here's a technical question for you. Your pictures range from a very vibrant color palette to graphic black and white. Is that a decision you make before or during a photo session, or do you decide that after the fact? And is it influenced by the available lighting conditions or technical factors, or is it an aesthetic choice?
To be honest with you, I'm a very non-technical photographer. I've never done any study into photography. I basically picked up a camera and taught myself. And it is influenced after the fact, depending on the mood of what was happening. For instance, if we're working in a setting where there's a bungal, so bungal is an Aboriginal word for dance ground. A lot of communities come together and share stories through dance.
Mm.
And I would always photograph in colour. But after, basically the spirits talk to me. If it's a vibrant dance, if it's something of a funny dance or a sharing dance, it generally stays in colour.
Mm.
Whereas something a little bit deeper, darker, and more meaningful, I extract the colour from it to ensure the feeling of that particular image is portrayed, how the groups portrayed the dance or the sharing of the culture.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I honestly don't know sometimes, and a lot of times it works and sometimes not so much.
I totally get that way of working. It's really meaningful.
It is meaningful, and that's what it is. Photography is a funny word, but anything that I work on, whether it's in my own culture or it's a meaningful capture.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I was working with a group quite recently where it was more structured. A lot of our people had come in, they were talking about health and education. All of a sudden we were playing traditional games, so that they had a thing called Mang Rook, which is Australian rules football. And the football was made out of kangaroo and possum skin fur. And, some of the group had never touched one of these things before, and the happiness and the joy of throwing it around and kicking it, it was just so beautiful that remained colourful, remained upbeat and happy, whereas I had a funeral not long ago where I extracted the colour from it because the mood was quite sombre. So,
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about gear for a minute. What's your go-to gear when it comes to cameras and lenses? And you also shoot video footage as well.
I do it all, sister, because I travel so much, and because Australia and a lot of our communities are in very remote areas. I've progressed from just photography, whereas becoming a videographer, cinematographer, whatever the terminology is expanded quite rapidly, and also as a commercial drone pilot.
Mm.
It all come about purely because we've got a lot more people out there picking up cameras and becoming photographers. I was one of the very few when I started, whereas now there's so many, you've got to advance your skills.
Right.
But to answer your question, I've been a Nikon man for a long, long time because I find they're very strong and robust. They put up with bouncing around in the back of four-wheel drives or troopies. Their weather seals are quite incredible. I've never been able to break one. The standard rig is, 24 to 70 and a 70 to 200. I have one on each shoulder. I still use a variety of different cameras, but my new babies, I call them, the new Z9s.
Okay, so you have gone to mirrorless.
100%. They've changed the way that I shoot And the beauty of it is I could be photographing a festival and all of a sudden, and it happened quite recently out at Uluru, Ayers Rock in Central Desert, where a series of Indigenous people from around the world had come to the anniversary of the National Indigenous Television Network, which we created 10 years ago. And they started to sing traditional songs to the local mob. Photography wouldn't have captured it, so I was quickly able to switch from that straight to video and capture the video of it and then switch back to photography in a heartbeat. And
Nice.
people were extremely surprised about how well it looked.
That's great. So, what about in a lot of these rural locations? Do you run into connectivity issues or issues with power? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, yeah. One of the beautiful things is recently working on a gig called Engineers Without Borders. And they've just developed this new trailer to hook on the back of your four-wheel drive where it's fully solar powered.
Wow.
And yeah, you rock up into a community and the sides unfold. It's like this big solar generator that you can just plug everything into. And it's built for the bush. It's built for remote areas.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense in Australia, I would think.
When you've got to drive thousands of kilometres to get to a place, you really need to be aware of backups of backups of backups.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with these new Z9s, I take power banks with me, and these things just don't run out. They're just mind-bogglingly beautiful on the way that they continue to operate without much backup for generators. But yeah, a lot of the time I have solar blankets, which I fold out onto the roof.
What about lighting gear or other accessories? How often and in what conditions do you use flash or artificial light?
I used to use flash a lot. I don't use it much anymore, apart from if I'm doing matching up conferences or that type of thing, or when I really want to bring the subject out. But I don't use lighting very often. It's mainly natural light. And I always say to people, I know my light. I look at my light. Before I do anything, I walk out and look at the light and then go, right, where do we need to come from to ensure that we get those beautiful shots? But clouds are my best friend in Australia because we have some really harsh conditions here, and I use that as a beautiful diffuser when it comes about.
That's a good point. It's not something that everyone would think of, but yeah, clouds can be your friend.
Oh, yeah, my friend all the time.
And what about ISO? Do you boost your ISO to high levels rather than use lighting?
Most definitely. Yeah, the ISO. So the beautiful thing about these bodies is I stick them on auto ISO, base rate of 64. And always watch how dark it gets. But I tend to find that a lot of the time, unless we get into pure darkness, it sits around 800. And the resolution is just beautiful. I've recently shot up to 24,000 and still it was quite a usable image.
Yeah, things have changed.
Technology is just a wonderful, wonderful tool, in particular with shooting, coming into darkness, which a lot of our ceremonies fall into that category now.
Right. And it lets you be invisible.
Very much so, yeah.
Okay, we're going to fade to darkness for a minute and take a short break. When we return, more with Wayne Quilliam and Australia's Indigenous cultures. I hope you're enjoying my chat with Wayne Quilliam for my new series, Picturing World Cultures. I'd really love to hear your thoughts about the episode, so please leave a rating and post a review on Apple Podcasts. And stay tuned for our next episode featuring my conversation with Iranian photographer Kiana Hayeri, which drops Thursday, January 4th. Okay, we are back with photographer Wayne Quilliam discussing Indigenous cultures in Australia and Tasmania. Hey there, Wayne.
Dude, 1 second. I was just checking my daughter. Got off to school okay. She's an incredible little photographer, that one, I tell you.
Keeps you young, right?
Oh, it really, really does. I remember the time I had an exhibition over there in New York at the United Nations. It was on Indigenous women's rights. And we were standing there, and she was, 6 or 7 years old. And we were, we'd put the exhibition up, and we had all the United Nations people standing there and talking about, how the Consul General would open the show, and ambassadors would talk, and then I'd do my talk on the show. She came up to me and she said, "Daddy," I said, "What's that, sweetie?" She says, "I'm an Aboriginal girl." I said, "Yes, that's right, darling." He said, "These photographs are all Aboriginal women." He said, "You're an Aboriginal man." "I know that." She says, "But I should be talking." I said, "You know what, sweetheart? As a part of cultural protocol, you should be talking." And oh god, the UN people went into conniptions. How can a 6-year-old girl, a 7-year-old girl, talk in front of all these people? I said, "Well, unless she does, I won't." And she did. She got up and spoke, and it was so extraordinary.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, she'll be far better than me in the future.
Mm-hmm.
What she loves about it, she features in my new book, so she's loving that as well.
That's great. Paying it forward.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful.
So you've photographed all types of community activities and events, from local day-to-day scenes to formal meetings and governmental events. But in 2008, you were the official photographer for a major milestone when Prime Minister Kevin Rudd formally apologized on behalf of the Parliament for past injustices inflicted on First Nations people. Can you describe what it was like to capture those historic moments?
You don't sometimes realise at the time, the gravity of what you're doing and the event itself. The apology was really probably the most significant thing I've photographed in my career, and I think something extraordinary would have to happen before anything surpassed that. But it was more than just the day, the days leading up to it. All my friends, all the indigenous leaders from across the country had all converged onto our nation's capital in Canberra, up at Parliament House. And I mean, the morning itself, there was a long line waiting because only a certain amount of people could come in. An old friend of mine, a famous Aboriginal actor called Ernie Dingo, he was actually in Crocodile Dundee, for those who've ever watched it.
Ah.
It was a very bitter, cold Canberra morning, and he was walking up the line of all the people, having a yarn, having a joke, talking to them about why they were there, where they were from. And as I was photographing these moments, it dawned on me just the importance of what was going to happen on the day.
Mm.
And so when we're in where Kevin Rudd had made the announcement, I was looking at him, but I was also looking at the gallery of all the people that were sitting there. And the emotions on their faces is what I was capturing. It was more about our people in there than it was about the politicians. And to see the old aunties cuddling and the men and the women crying, and then the jubilation once the announcement was made, was very, very powerful. It was after we'd come out and the announcement was made, and we were in the great hall where all the politicians had come out. One interesting moment that happened was Dr. Marika, a Yolngu woman. She's from a traditional area in Northern Australia, in the Northern Territory. She structured the framework around reconciliation and the apology. And you'll see the photograph. She's a very black woman, and she's got this little white baby in her arms. Now, that little baby was called Marley Hosh. She's an Aboriginal girl. And it actually goes back to your question earlier about skin colour. But what had happened was Marley was playing up a little bit, and Dr. Marika went and sat in the chair where Kevin Rudd was sitting after he'd went down into the foyer. And as soon as Marley got sat into her arms, she just went to sleep. And I looked around, and she looked at me, and she gave me that twinkle in her eye that I just got that one photo. And it wasn't until later that we realised that that was the photo that really personified what the apology meant to our people.
Mm.
That meaningful image that resonated and showed the strength of our culture. The story progressed after that, because a year later I was invited to create an exhibition, the first time an exhibition be done at the National Parliament House in Canberra. And we wanted to use that photo on these commemorative posters that were going to go around Australia. I was flying to Darwin, which is, I think, about 4,000 kilometres from where I live, to meet Dr. Marika. And you'll hear me say her name, Dr. Marika, not her last name.
Mm-hmm.
Because in our culture, when somebody passes away, you don't use their last name until the family designate that you can use it again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's why she's still known as that. So what happened is we went into Darwin to meet with her, and she always attended the meeting. She was always there, and we couldn't find her. We rang back home out to Yakala, her community, and they said, well, actually, she's come home, and unfortunately, she's just passed away. And it was quite devastating because she was an extraordinary person. Unfortunately, what had happened, they'd already printed up all the posters without permission, and we thought we were actually going to have to destroy them all because another part of culture is not showing somebody's image when they're passed away.
Jeez.
It's very strong in that area. But after we negotiated with her community as a collective, and then they allowed us to use that poster to realise the incredible work she'd done for our people. And that photo is still quite famous throughout Australia now.
Wow. But in general, would other pictures of her not be published because she's no longer with us?
Exactly right. I've got a lot of images from the past of her that I've never sought to use or get permission from community to use. It may happen one day. There may be something that we may need to do. But I then would go back to her community, her family, and seek permission to be able to use. Cultural protocol to me is everything. I will not deviate from it, looking after the rights of our people.
Yeah. Are there other aspects of cultural protocol that are unique within Indigenous Australian cultures?
It's quite funny, actually, because in the old days, what had happened is I used to take sometimes international photographers out on community. And we'd have a little bit of a running joke where we'd come in and then somebody would wave their hand as in they didn't want their photo, and the photographer would say, oh, is that because they're afraid that, the camera will take their spirits away? And it was always a running joke that a lot of the mob would laugh later and go, do they actually really believe that? Because there is other cultures around the world that do believe that, whereas in our culture that's not true. The main part is that you generally don't use somebody's image if they've passed away until all the family have mourned in the length of time that they need to, and then the image can be used. So I've had images there where community have come back 10 years later, go, okay, Wayne, we can now release that image and use it.
So it's not just the picture of the person who's passed away, it's all the other people within the community feel a restriction?
Yes. It is. It's and it's all individualistic. And it's the same as places. So we have what's called men's business and women's business. And there's places in this country I'm not allowed to photograph or film. I'm not allowed to even look at it or be in the area. The women will tell me, Wayne, over there is women's business. You're not allowed there. I'm not allowed to record or document their stories. I'm not allowed to know about it. And the same as the other way around. A lot of we have men's business where we just don't share with women, and still strictly adhered to.
Wow.
It has relaxed a little bit over the years. I actually now get invited to photograph a lot of non-traditional women's business. For instance, that show I was talking about on Indigenous women's rights, they wanted an Aboriginal male photographer to do it because they didn't want a female influence on the women's discussions. So that's what I bring to the table, a very unbiased view when I'm told not to.
So you're seen as being more objective in that circumstance?
Very much so. And I don't offer my lens into their business because that's not my right. My right is to record and document what I'm asked to do and do it in a way that's respectful and meaningful.
Right. That's fascinating. So you photographed countless celebrations and ceremonial dances, and that's a subject that can be very challenging to photograph for many reasons, from the fast action, the limited camera angles that you can get when a dance is happening, to cultural sensitivities in capturing sacred moments. Are there any best practices or tips you can share about documenting these kinds of situations, especially for anyone who's an outsider to a given culture seeking to take pictures within the culture?
Yeah, no, wonderful question. And it's something I recently brought up when I was at the National Photographic Awards in Australia, and I mentioned to all the photographers that we think it's wonderful that non-Indigenous photographers are documenting our communities as well, because the more people we have doing this, the stronger our culture will be. And some of the suggestions I offer, in particular on ceremonial and dance, is first understand why. What is the ceremony about? What is these dances about? It's just not pretty pictures of blackfellas running around painted up. These are storytelling moments which some are very sacred, some are very, very meaningful to the different tribes that they're dancing or they're performing. Other ones are more contemporary dance. They still hold spirituality within them, but they don't necessarily have the ancient cultural background from our ancestors, so there's not any restrictions. I generally mention that when we do go into a place, the first thing I look at, and we go back to the thing, is light. If we're starting at a particular time in the morning, that I'll position myself generally where I believe the light will not be as harsh on skin. In particular, a lot of our people have facial structures of sunken eye sockets. That then influences you'll get, because I say everything is in the eyes. You know, all the beautiful photos that I've captured has got those beautiful eyes which tell the story. So I'll position myself to ensure that I've got the maximum light, particularly in people's faces. Whereas at the end of the day, I'll go the opposite way. I know the majority of these dances. I don't see the image, I listen to it. And that sounds quite strange as a photographer. And it happened at a few festivals over the years where a lot of the non-Indigenous photographers will be shooting just thousands of images. I'd say they actually hear me counting to myself, or they could see me doing a beat, and I go, dun, 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 shoot, dun, 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 shoot. Because I know the dances and the rhythm, I actually shoot with the rhythm of the dance because I listen to the dancers when they perform and their songs. That's how I capture it. I don't shoot 1,000 images. I'll shoot probably 5 or 10.
Right, right. And it's all rhythmic and it cycles back. I get that completely. I've photographed a lot of dancing people myself over time, and I used a similar kind of thinking.
Exactly right. It does cycle back. It's like any great song. If you listen to the rhythm, you'll pick up the time that, and you watch people's hands and their feet. That's how I work. Some people have tried it and either they haven't got rhythm or they're not listening properly. I haven't got much rhythm, but I listen to the photo.
Yeah, but it's a matter of interpretation of the rhythm.
It is, yeah, yeah. I did a gathering in Mexico. I was invited there as a cultural ambassador, and again, I watched their dances and I listened to their dances after I sought permission from the senior lawman there to photograph their festival. And he picked up the same thing. You listen to our dance, you listen to our songs. And I showed him the photos. Yeah, you understand. It was beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm working on a dance project as we speak, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, the National Portrait Gallery is doing a big show on Australian dance, and naturally enough, because I've photographed so much dance, they're using a lot of my images in there as well. So look forward to that one coming out.
Nice. So we spoke about elders earlier, and I want to go back to that subject. Elders have a lifetime of experience hidden within their faces. So when you're photographing an elder, does your approach differ from that of photographing younger subjects? Is there anything you do to try to tease out stories visually from someone's physical presence?
I'm working at the moment with my auntie here in Victoria, and she's a part of the Boonwurrung tribe, and she's very over the top, and she does the purple hair and the big gorgeous glasses and against the black skin. It's just, I love working with her because every photo is just a whole new adventure working with her. I love it. Whereas if I'm going into a very remote community, a lot of our people won't look up. In particular, women don't look men in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
So it does take me time to work with them to understand my position of what I would like to do and whether they're happy enough to do it. If they're not, I generally walk away and let them have their own space until somebody will fully explain it to them. It's a part of being respectful.
Right.
It's a part of trying to find that really nice balance of why and how we capture these images. And it makes a world of difference. Whereas you go to say, like the Torres Strait Island mob, just naturally have that zest for life, that beautiful, gregarious, big voices. And I find my photographs take on a new life when I'm working with them because they give me a different vision on life of how we capture it. And that's just so much fun.
Mm. But I want to pick up on something that you said where the idea of if you're wanting to photograph a subject and they are not willing or not so happy about it, you might go away, but not forever. It's just a matter perhaps of time before the person might reconsider and be more open to having their picture taken.
Oh, very true. No, exactly right. It's finding the right time and space for the individual to be able to do it. They're happy with you to be in their presence. And sometimes unknowingly you'll go into, let's say, a rural community. And unfortunately, most recently, I was just working on a project regarding SIDS, cot death. And the project was to interview and photograph some people that had unfortunately lost their children with cot death. So you had to be very sensitive to who they were and what they were doing and the space that they were in. Some people hadn't necessarily got over it, and you didn't want to create an atmosphere where they weren't comfortable, they weren't happy with it. And there's always a lot of talk and discussion about how we do that, and I listen a lot.
Yeah.
And when you listen, the stories then evolve from there. It's when you go like a bull at a gate and you just there to capture the image. I think a lot of the time you lose the beauty of what's going on around you. You've got to be sensitive to it. And unfortunately, a lot of news photographers, I know they've got a job to do, but they miss the point of what they're trying to capture.
Yeah. It's just finding that right moment.
And you don't get it right every time.
Mm-hmm.
There's times where I've stepped back and I've gone, maybe I should have considered something a little bit differently. But, I always say this is a learning journey.
Yeah.
And every single day I learn something new and something interesting, which I find is really fascinating.
So are there ever specific moments or situations that you avoid photographing or pictures that might be problematic to make due to cultural sensitivities? We talked about the idea of a person after they've passed away. Are there other examples of that within Indigenous cultures in Australia?
A great example, I was working in a very remote island community, and I was actually over there to photograph a commercial banking venture. And we got off the small plane, and normally someone picks you up from the airstrip and takes you into town, but there was no one there, which was really strange. So I had two corporate executives with me, and we decided to foot it into town. So we're walking in there, and I could see up on the horizon a lot of people gathered and walking from right to left. And the more I looked at it, and I basically grabbed the camera out with the 70-200 and looked through it, and then realised that it was actually a funeral procession. And I said to them, listen, I'm going to have to put the cameras away. We're going to have to go and put these things down somewhere and find out what's going on. And, these guys had paid a fair bit of money to go out and do these type of things. And they sort of, what we say, cracked the wobblies a little bit, going, well, we're here for a job and we need to do it. And I said, well, it's just not going to happen. I need to go and talk to the community to find out what's going on. And we may or may not. Well, let's just be sensitive. It's a funeral.
Mm-hmm.
I left those guys behind. I went down. All the old uncles were sitting under a tree doing ceremony, just singing. And I went, oh, okay, it's definitely a ceremony. I'm going to have to sort of walk away and wait till it's finished. And then old uncle goes, hey, Wayne, what are you doing here? I go, I'm here with this mob to do some photos. And he goes, oh, no problem. He said, we're just doing a smoking ceremony here. Let me talk to the old men and we'll get back to you. So I just stood away a little bit and they all had a yarn in language. Hey, Wayne, we got an idea. What's that, Unc? How about you photograph the smoking ceremony and the funeral, and then once you're finished, Once everybody's happy, then you can do what you need to do. I said, good deal. We'll do that. So the smoking ceremony is when somebody passes away and the group gathers and they use smoke to cleanse. In particular, this stage, it was a house. So all the family goes through the house, not ward off bad spirits, but to get rid of the bad spirits that may have been in there so that the family can go back into the house again.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I'd photographed and ensured everyone was happy, I was allowed to do the corporate shoot later that day. In the old days, that would never have happened.
Right, right.
Cameras down, non-Indigenous people nowhere near the place. No, it's, like I said, a progressive culture.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And you got two great stories out of it.
I did, and they still use the photos today. It's actually one of them's in my book.
Hmm. So besides photographing First Nations people in Australia, you've also made pictures of many other Indigenous cultures around the world. But despite the obvious language difference, how much commonality do you find between the different cultures and communities?
Yeah, the big commonality, aside from culture and family, it's connection to land and sea.
Mm.
It may seem obvious, but even today I find it extraordinary that our storytelling practices, connecting to culture, connecting to land, it flows through the earth. It flows across the planet. What's happening these days is that non-Indigenous society are beginning to pick up on it, understanding that we are not the owners of this land, we're just custodians. We've never professed to want to own anything. We've always been there to look after Mother Earth and everything about it. It's quite spiritual, but it's also a lot of common sense. And the commonality of whether I'm working in Bolivia or Mexico or Vietnam is that spiritual connection to land and the culture that evolves from that spiritual connection really does resonate in a lot of my images. And that's what's allowed me, I think, to move pretty freely between different cultures. And, just recently I was on a shoot in Morocco and just talking to some of the young ones over there about their journeys as photographers and their restrictions on what they can photograph. It was quite interesting because they can't express their cultural creativity because of, say, government interference.
Right. Do you find there are places where you coming in as an outsider to an Indigenous culture can photograph things that local people cannot?
It hasn't happened a lot in the journey. Cuba was an interesting one. Many years ago, I had a major exhibition at the Citadel de San Francisco in Havana. And the invitation by the president to go out and photograph his people was made at the opening of the exhibition. He invited me to go out and photograph his people with no restrictions. And I wanted to engage a local photographer to work with me, but that was quickly knocked on the head.
Interesting.
It made me realise then that I've been fortuitous in my journey, that I have been allowed into these places and probably captured things others may not have seen purely because I am Aboriginal.
Right, right.
We do have a different lens, a different view on people, places, and I'm not saying it's any better or worse, but I'm just saying it's just a total perspective on growing up in a cultural background. It'd be like me coming into a community in America without the cultural knowledge of a particular group. When I was in America, end of last year, working with the Navajo and the Sioux, their photographers had a totally different scope of what I did, and it was beautiful to learn. And I want to come back and continue to learn and share my knowledge and share theirs.
Mm-hmm. So with that idea of learning, you teach workshops in digital storytelling. And one thing you cover in these sessions are the 7 steps of digital storytelling. What are the 7 steps?
Well, those 7 steps continue to evolve, to be honest. They evolve all the time when I evolve as a storyteller. I suppose the first step is always know who you are as a person. What is your role within this journey? I do this for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. find out the subjects, the matter that you're working on, who, what, how, why, when and where. What's the end goal that you're looking for? Ensure that you're as informed as you can possibly be on your subject. Offer respect to both land and people when you're doing this. I would say I'm a spiritual person without being overzealous in spirituality. But I know when I go onto a country and I introduce myself, I say to the ancestors, I'm on your land. Are you happy that I'm here and that I can work on it? It's incredible, some of the images and some of the things that happen to you and the stories that evolve purely because you respect the people and the place that you're in.
And you let them know that you're respecting them.
Exactly. You need to let people, the places and the spirits know that you have total respect. And I don't know whether it's me or whether as I get older, but I see a lot of times these days as respect is starting to not become prioritised. You know, I always say to people, listen, you offer me respect, I'll offer you the same. You may not like what I do or who I am, but you know what, let's be respectful of each other and we'll be happy. I think it's a good way to live life.
Yeah, that's a beautiful statement and a great way to sum up this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on the culture of Australia's First Nations people with us and your insights about making pictures there. But before we go, I'd like to end with a short visual questionnaire that's inspired by the TV show Inside the Actor's Studio. It's a brief list of questions with one-sentence answers. So, Wayne Quilliam, with all things being equal, what is your preference, black and white or color?
Black and white.
And which image orientation do you gravitate to more often, horizontal or vertical or square?
Ooh, that's a very interesting one.
Yeah, it is.
I am changing it.
It's something that many photographers don't even consider.
Yeah, it used to be portrait, then it went horizontal. Now it's evolving to square.
Wow.
And it's fluctuating. I'm starting, in particular, the creations of artwork and what I'm doing. It's evolving to square, and I'm not sure it's because of the media influence and the way that
Right.
it's done. But I think it's more, even in the early days, I always tilted my camera. I always had this thing of just slightly tilting it off center just to give it a different essence. And I think I'm getting that stage where I want to do it again and I want to do something different.
So what's your lens preference, prime or zoom?
Definitely zoom. My 70-200, it's the go-to every single time. I rarely now even use the 24-70. It's mainly because of the work that I do that I'm just intrigued by able to get in close and get the emotion in the photo. So, yeah, definitely 70-200.
And if you could only carry one lens, which would it be, the 70-200 or?
Ooh, yeah, still the 70-200, yeah.
What one photographer, living or dead, has influenced your work the most and why?
That's a really difficult question. Max Dupain, not so much influenced me, but I was intrigued by his journey and I admire his work. I won't say that anyone's ever influenced me, but I definitely enjoy Max Dupain.
So what's the most important thing you look for at the instant you click the shutter?
The story, whether or not that photo will tell the story without me having to actually say anything about it.
So other than photography, what profession or craft would you most like to explore?
I'm currently doing it. I'm now moving in the world of 3D projections using my imaging in surround exhibitions. Yeah, I've got one in Canberra last year at the National Library and it's called Connection. I brought in about 100 different Aboriginal artists and we have these big digital shows, digital projections. Yeah, so I was the curator of the show and I'm now not only doing that but also working on these 3D immersive igloo spaces where you walk in and the photographs are projected all around the room. I am having an absolute scream, not learning technology because it's way beyond me, but how I can now tell a story when people immerse themselves into it.
Sounds like you're turning into a bit of an impresario.
I am attempting to.
So finally, in a single word, what is your biggest motivation for making pictures?
Happiness.
Oh, that's nice. So are there any projects that you have in the works that our listeners might be interested in?
Oh, most definitely. Photography will always be my passion. It's actually more of an addiction, I think you could call it, because if I'm not shooting, I get a little bit lost. My wife will tell me, you need to get in the car and go out bush. You need to just connect back to country and just photograph something, whether it's textures of country or animals or what. I've got a fascination with clouds, for instance. I now own the first Aboriginal wine company, and
Oh, wow.
Mount Yengo is the first Aboriginal-owned wine company, which we are going global. We hope to sign a contract with Walmart very soon, which will be nice, and I'll be back and forth to the States with that. I've just set up a new company as well, which is more around that 3D immersive experience. Last year, we projected all my work on the Sydney Harbour Bridge during a big festival called Vivid. Coming up next month, my new book called Culture is Life. Just finished that off. I've got the advanced copies now. This beautiful, big, glossy coffee table book of 35 years of work in 120 pages is just beautiful.
Wow, congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. It's a passion that I love to share. Apart from that, hopefully visiting the States soon. I'm working on a project with the new embassy in Washington, the Australian Embassy, and hoping to bring a whole new series of photographs across to the States. And my big dream, and I'm going to make it happen, is to tour a series of my work around the US schools or universities or indigenous tribes throughout the country to share our culture. So watch out for that, because I will make it happen sooner or later.
That's great. I can't wait. And we'll have links to your website and social media in our show notes. So Wayne Quilliam, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, we'd love to hear about it. Head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a comment. And while you're there, make sure that subscribe button is clicked for automatic updates about every episode release. You can also find us on the Explora blog, where we post photos from our guests along with the show notes. And if you're a fan of social media, please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group, where you can share your favorite photos and comment about the show. I'm Jill Waterman, the podcast creative producer and host of this series. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. And that beautiful theme music you heard was composed by our colleague Gabriel Richards. Thanks so much, Gabe. You nailed it. Executive producer for this episode is Yermi Weiss, and our editorial director is Sean Steiner. On behalf of us all, thanks so much for tuning in.